Hello, it's time for another dose of electromagnetism and plasma currents in the space environment. Not so long ago, I've connected those enormous cosmic rays with enormous flux tubes and magnetic connections between Sun and the source of low energy field. Now I can proudly confirm my guess. Notice that the directions are always similar, but differ slightly as Earth is moving along its orbit. But now check out the readings on Stanford University MHD simulation. If some of you don't know what is a flux tube, look here. Of course, this tube extends further into the solar system and because of sun rotation, bends like arms of a galaxy. This tube was probably the cause of those anomalies on Bartol's page readings. The flux tube was as well recorded by ACE satellite. There is a visible magnetic shock which took place after the CME impact. It affected only the BY magnetic component. Some very interesting readings were generated by SWMF Global Magnetosphere model at the time when flux tube passed through Earth. Here we can see a sector boundary which stays all the time in the far side of magnetotail. And here is a second sector boundary which stays all the time in front of magnetosphere. Earth was placed at this time in space between different parts of IMF. What visibly generated a pressure on our magnetic field. On this image, bow shock is gone. Look at this. Solar particles were clearly pushed back in opposite direction. Clearly, there are two forces which are opposing each other. But finally, solar particles manage to pass through. After checking the ionosphere monitors, I can say that the passing of giant flux tube affected the neutral gas temperature. I never seen it growing above 1300 kelvins. But this time neutral gas became warmer than ionospheric plasma. Something is changing in the radiation belts. It seems that electrons at higher energy levels are coming back after a couple months of absence. Maybe it's somehow connected with the latest outburst of solar flares, which started on 20th of August. However, most of recent events took place on the incoming limb, what means that there were no magnetic connections between Earth and this active region. Something strange took place as well on MACC sulfur dioxide monitor between 20 and 21st of August. This giant emission appeared out of nowhere. Some of you probably started already to wonder when I will talk about the last two unusual earthquakes, which took place in the late evening on 21st of August. First one was a 4.6 magnitude quake in South Africa. Second one was a 4.7 magnitude quake recorded 35 minutes later in Iceland. I've checked most of monitors on ISWA, but I couldn't find any unusual activity at this time. However, there is something on ACE magnetic field chart, a 180 degrees flip of the IMF orientation. This shift affected mostly the BX and BY magnetic components. Not so long ago, I've recorded some odd impulses which are recorded every day by GOES East sounder between 4 and 5 UTC. It seems that the anomalies got stronger, as now the images from 4 UTC are being deleted. However, on images from 5 UTC, the impulses are still visible clearly. It's just my guess, but I think that those impulses are connected with magnetic disturbances which are being recorded almost each day on GOES satellite environment plot at similar time. Another possible factor was a low energy proton spike which took place in the same period of time, but it is hard to see it on the 3 days graph. Another quakes took place not so long ago in the two most active areas of last couple days, Iceland and Iran-Iraq border region. When we'll look at ACE readings, we will notice couple of sudden IMF magnetic shifts in last hours, but there is too big difference in times to blame those disturbances for the quakes. Well, at least not directly. As I said not so long ago, rapid changes of the IMF polarity are very often followed by plasma discharges. What happened as well after the last event before Iceland quake. And as we can see, at the time of quake there was a clear backside reconnection with the low energy field. Another possible factor can be the fact that during last hours electric potential of the ionosphere was pretty unstable. Around half hour before the quake, potential above northern polar cap switched from positive to negative charge. It was more than a year ago when I noticed that when negative potential is placed over the northern hemisphere, seismic activity is growing. Now, after all this time, I can say that it is directly connected with the orientation of IMF. It seems that I've said about the ionospheric potential and seismic activity connection right in time, as couple minutes later, 10:30 p.m. UTC, a 6.3 magnitude quake hit the Valparaiso in Chile. Although at this time there were no visible plasma outflows on the SWMF magnetosphere monitors, ACE satellite recorded another shift of the IMF magnetic components. To be honest, this shock was actually minor, but it managed to affect the low energy field Earth connection. It is visible on the magnetopause position monitor. Here we can see two Flux tubes which are connecting with the planet through the plasma sphere. Now one of the tubes starts to disconnect itself. At the time of quake, only one connection remained active, what caused a side-to-side wobble along the Y dimension. But more important, that the ionospheric potentials were affected as well, and the unstable tripolar configuration changed to a classic dipole, with the negative potential placed over northern hemisphere. Of course, I wouldn't talk about those readings if at this time one of the flux tube openings wouldn't be placed over Southern America. However, at the time of quake, the connectivity point started to shift towards the opposite side of the globe. So it was probably the magnetic reconnection what triggered this earthquake. Enough of all this shaking. Time for another dose of atmospheric tsunamis, which start to become something common above the northern Africa. What the hell is this? For the end, another dose of deadly static discharges. Those events caused by lightning strikes took place only in last week. Class dismissed. Peace.